the Bar Association of Sri Lanka as well. We at Colombo Law Society are committed to make a strong and independent bar and to further the skills, knowledge, the welfare of the members. Our seminars committee was originally organizing a series of seminars. However, due to this COVID-19 pandemic, it has become impossible to conduct any seminars in the near future. Therefore, we have organized a series of e-lectures for the benefit of the membership as well as the legal fraternity. This e-lecture is the very first of the series. From the next week onwards, Colombo Law Society will be conducting e-lectures on every Friday evening. I would like to thank the organizers, the co-chairs of the subcommittee, Mr. Chatura Galhena and Mr. Sanath Parunaratne, then our treasurer, Mr. Nalin Samarakon, and the organizer, Mr. Imasi Mithias. They have been working really hard to organize this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this e-lecture will be of much use to you, and I invite you to join with us the future e-lectures as well. Now, I invite Mr. Chatura Galhena to introduce today's lecture to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. President. My task is to introduce the speaker, which is not a difficult task because most of the members as well as the legal fraternity knows Mr. Jayasundara very well, and he's not a stranger to HALSTAF as well as to the legal forums where both academic and professional discussions are involved. In brief, Mr. Jayasundara was enrolled as an attorney at law in the year 1991 and commenced his legal career at the chambers of Mr. K. Kanageeswaran, President's Counsel. After about 2 decades of his successful practice, he was appointed a President's Counsel in year 2017. His main areas of practice are admiralty law, company law, and intellectual property law. However, he has an extensive practice in both civil and commercial litigation, starting from district court, extending up to the Supreme Court. In addition to his professional skills and credentials, he holds a Master's of Law degree in international trade. So today's topic was designed in order to address the present issues faced by most of the companies, which will come to lawyers in near future to address. Mr. Jayasundara has done an extensive research in this area, and this lecture will be very useful for all of us. And before passing the forum to the speaker, there will be a Q&A session after the lecture. So you can use the Q&A tab on the bottom of this screen to post your questions, which will be answered at the end of the lecture. So I will invite Mr. Jayasundara to commence the lecture, and at the end of the lecture, we will attend to the Q&A session. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chatura, and thank you, Vijay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Colombo Law Society for giving me this opportunity to speak on aspects of duties of directors in a situation where the company is financially stressed. Before we start, just as Chatura said, there will be a Q&A session at the end, and if you can keep posting your questions even during the presentation. At the end of it, depending on the time limitations, we will try and answer as many questions as possible. So before I go to the main, the formal presentation, we all know a company is considered a non-natural person. an incorporated person who has no natural existence other than the legal existence that is given by incorporation. So, like most often people say the birth of a company or the incorporation of the company is like the birth of a natural person. There's no argument about that. Then, as is natural for natural people, the company is also at a particular period of time, for various reasons, will have to be dissolved. Now, that dissolution, although the birth is like the birth of a natural person, the dissolution or the end of a company is not like the death of a natural person. Right? So if you take the corollary, there's two ways. You can either kill the company in two ways. One is get somebody to do it for you, which is something like justifiable homicide, where the company decides that they can go on and they make an application to court, and the court will, after inquiry, will decide whether the company should be dissolved, and will make an order for the winding up and the dissolution of a company. That's homicide, because the court is basically legally killing the company. The other way of doing it is what is known as a voluntary winding up. A voluntary winding up, you don't ask the assistance of the court as such, but you decide that you need to die. And then you go through the process of a voluntary winding up, and by yourself and with the assistance of a liquidator, you end the life of the company. It's more like euthanasia. You need somebody's assistance to kill the company. It's not like suicide, because a company by itself, by the directors alone or the shareholders alone, can't kill itself. So it's more like euthanasia. You get the assistance of somebody to kill the company. So situations or the one of the main reasons on which companies are dissolved, wound up and dissolved, is where the company is insolvent, financially insolvent. Now, financially insolvent, we will come to that when we go through the presentation. The issue is, now, because of these 2 months of COVID curfew and the economy, the situation in the economy, in most instances, a fair number of the companies that are registered and trading in Sri Lanka will have financial difficulties, which might lead to the only solution of the company to wind up. Now, financially distressed companies need not necessarily and mandatorily wind up and end itself. So if you again take a corollary of a human being, if you say, for example, let's take, if you get COVID or this coronavirus, and you're found, you get the symptoms, just because you get the symptoms of a virus or an illness, nobody actually needs to die. So the first step would be to stay at home, as they say, as they advise repeatedly. You stay at home, have a bit of kottamalli or something, then do steam inhalation, and you try to recover. Okay, so you might have 14 days more, but at a particular point of time. So what that does is, you isolate yourself from the normal day-to-day business of the normal day-to-day life and recover. Now, there is provision in the Companies Act to do that. Where a company is in distress and the company needs some form of assistance, the stage by stage, the Companies Act gives you reliefs and solutions without actually destroying the company. The first stage then would be to isolate yourself. So the company might isolate yourself, negotiate. If you are looking at the company will then negotiate with your financiers, with your banks, with your shareholders, with certain new investors, and try to recover. So it might not be the COVID virus, you might be having a very bad flu. The next stage is, of course, when it is found that what you have is a bit too serious for you to do it by yourself. Then, as in a natural person, you would go to the a doctor and get the doctor's assistance. The doctor will then take care of you, give prescribed medicine, see that you take the medicine, and you might recover from that, the medication and whatever advice that the doctor does. There is a corollary situation in the Companies Act also. So the first situation where you isolate yourself and try and negotiate yourself out of your precarious or distressed financial situation is what is called seeking an arrangement or a compromise of your debt, an arrangement between shareholders or a compromise of your debt with your creditors. If that doesn't work, where we go to a doctor and ask the doctor, can you please take care of me? Then that stage, under the Companies Act, there is provision to appoint a person called an administrator who will take over the company, try and find a solution, treat the company in the best way possible. Then the company might recover, and upon recovery, hand it back over to the directors and the shareholders. The next situation, unfortunately, would be if that recovery doesn't happen even with an administrator looking after your affairs. That is when you're pushed into the intensive care unit. Then nobody has any role, the person has no role in the matter. Your life is completely in the hands of a liquidator, and basically, not that everybody who goes to intensive care unit dies, but if you go into the intensive care unit of a company, which is the winding up process, the end result is that you will die. So that the last rites will be done by a liquidator. Right? Now that is the worst case scenario for a financially distressed company. There are enough and more provisions in the Companies Act for a company to survive a distressed, financially distressed situation, recover, and then maybe prosper subsequently. It has happened in several situations, even in Sri Lanka. What you would normally know as in the United States, what is called a Chapter 11, where you don't necessarily, because of any financial distress, you don't mandatorily or necessarily go down the path of winding up of the company. Now, these provisions were not there in the earlier 1982 and the earlier Companies Act and the Companies Ordinance, and were introduced in the 2007 version of the Companies Act. So I will, because I have basically only another half an hour to 35 minutes, I will try and structure the discussion on the lines of what is a distressed company, financially distressed company. Then what are the duties of a director in any company, whether it's financially distressed or not, whether the company is insolvent or is about to go insolvent or not. What are the duties of a director? Then if the company is having financial difficulties, what are the duties that are incumbent on the directors of the company, and in certain circumstances, shareholders of the company, to act in such a situation. So I will be going in and out of the presentation, but my basic structure will be that. And also, there are also legal repercussions that is stipulated in the Companies Act if the directors don't carry out the duties that are imposed on the company, on the directors by the Companies Act. We must remember the initial part of it with regard to the director. The director's duties are generally overarching over the entire business of the company. So there's a lot of trust that is given to the directors to act in a manner for the benefit of the company. Now, initial common law principle was that the directors' duties were only to the benefit of the company. They have to look after the company irrespective of whatever ramifications that are there for other people, other stakeholders of the company. However, subsequently, this has been developed and this has been expanded to the extent that now the director's duties will spread not only to the looking after the interests of the company, but looking after the interests of the shareholders, looking after the interest of other stakeholders like employees, especially in banking circumstances, maybe your customers, financial, your depositors, and most importantly, there is now a duty owed by the directors specifically towards creditors to see that your actions as directors that does not adversely affect the interests of the creditors. We will deal with that as we go along. So I will structure the lecture on that basis, and hope if you have any questions, please post them on this Q&A system, and we will try depending on the time. I might also, since there is curfew, I might actually have a captured audience, unless you all want to go and have a cup of tea or exercise or something. I don't mind. Unlike in a normal seminar, so I might take a little bit more time than 45 minutes because the subject is a bit complex. Not complicated, it's complex. That's about it. So let me start. Okay. Now, the first thing we must understand is or discuss is what is a distressed company. A company can be distressed in many ways. We are now focusing on a financially distressed company, and more in the background of COVID-19 and the present economic conditions of the country. The financial distress, so I'm sorry, other than the financial distress, you will have your other stressors in the company because of this situation. For example, your employees, your turnover, your day-to-day business. We are not at the moment interested in that. We are also not interested in the cause of the distress. Sometimes the cause of the distress might not have anything to do with COVID-19. It might be mismanagement by the directors, misappropriation for their own benefit by the shareholders. So we are not into the reasons of the cause of the distress to the company. We are trying to find a way out in a situation that the company is in financial distress. Now, basically, a financially distressed company is a company that is either already insolvent, or in colloquial terms, already bankrupt, or a company about to go insolvent. Solvency is defined in Section 57 of the Companies Act, where the law deems very important to understand that the law, irrespective of what the actual situation is in the company is, the law deems where a company cannot pay its debts as they become due in the normal course of business, and the value of the company's assets are less than the value, the solvency is where the value of the company's assets is greater than the value of its liabilities and the company's stated capital. So, first instance, if you can't pay your debts, you are deemed not to have satisfied the solvency test, and where the value of your assets of the company is less than the value of your liabilities and the company's stated capital, then in law, whether you like it or not, your company is deemed to be insolvent. So the solvency test is used at several stages of a company. For example, before the issue of shares, before the issuance in certain situations with regard to shares, the Companies Act specifies mandatorily that the company must pass the solvency test before you do whatever that you are proposing to do. So, in respect and in the context of what we are discussing today, the basic issue is if you do a solvency test of the company and your company fails, then you are deemed in law to be insolvent. Now, that is legal insolvency, right? Financially, you might be in a different position. Financially, you might have better options, but if you can't pass the solvency test, then you are considered insolvent and you have to take the steps that are specified in law. Now, financially, like if you take financial considerations only, there is a situation as in the first instance in the solvency test, your company might be insolvent if you can't meet the debts as they fall due. Although you might have a lot of assets which can be liquidated to settle the debts. Now, whether you have those assets or not, even if you are asset rich, if your company can't pay the debts as they become due, then in law, you are considered insolvent. Financially, you might not be insolvent because upon liquidation of your assets, you might be able to, and you might most probably settle your liabilities. The other situation is and that is called a cash flow insolvency. That is basically, that might be one of the main grounds of insolvency post-COVID. You might have a lot of assets, but because of the fact that you are out of business, you are not trading for a couple of months, you might not have ready cash to settle the debts as they become due. The other method of insolvency is called balance sheet insolvency. Balance sheet insolvency is where the company is insolvent although it has no outstanding current debt. That is where your assets are not sufficient to cover your present, future and contingent liabilities. That is the second part. So those are financial issues which can be overcome. But the fact remains that as far as the law is concerned, it doesn't matter whether you have a balance sheet insolvency or whether you have a cash flow insolvency. It doesn't matter what the reason of your insolvency is. If you can't satisfy the solvency test, you are deemed insolvent. Okay, so it's very important to understand, and especially I understand that most of the participants are lawyers. If you're advising your clients, doing looking at the financials, looking at the accounts, looking at the audited accounts, you might find that the company is in financial terms solvent. However, if the company is not cannot satisfy the solvency test, then the provisions of the Companies Act with regard to insolvency will kick in, whether you like it or not. Okay, because your duties as directors arise from the fact that you don't satisfy the solvency test. Whether subsequently you can liquidate your assets and settle it is not considered, because your duties in respect of insolvency arises the minute you fail the solvency test. That has to be very clearly kept in mind when you are advising a client. They might have the biggest high-rise building in Colombo. They might have the huge asset base, a land, for example, real estate base. But if they can't satisfy the debts as they become due, then the duties of the directors kick in. Okay, right. Now, the other matter that you need to consider, and especially when advising, you have to look at, is there are, even if your the insolvency procedure kicks in, there are very quick ways of getting back into solvency without taking the path of a liquidation or winding up, right? So before your clients, as far as the lawyers are concerned, before your clients think that they need, and most of the time they come thinking there is no recourse at all, before you go down that road, there are ways of a company to come out of a financial distress situation. If it is asset heavy, and you can to a certain extent satisfy your liabilities, you can do asset liquidation. That is basically colloquial, as we call it, we sell the property. Okay, then there might be a possibility for the shareholders or investors to put in a fresh infusion of capital, equity capital, or it can't be more liabilities, can't be more debt. It has to be equity, infusion of equity by the existing shareholders or investors. Then there might be, in your books, you might have retained profits or other reserves that you may have. You can draw down those as those retained profits, and there are other financial recourses that are available where you can restructure the capital or the assets and ownership of the company. So merely because you're about to fail the solvency case, the solvency test, or you have actually failed the solvency test, the immediate reaction or the immediate solution is not winding up the company. The first and most important thing is to see whether the present crisis can be overcome by non-legal remedies. Like, as I said, infusion of capital, asset liquidation, or drawing down retained profits, and so on and so forth. Now, if that also fails, or if that option is not available, then we have to necessarily look at the legal remedies that are available for a distressed company. Okay, right. Now, that is what a financially distressed company is. In short, if you can't pass the solvency test, then you're technically and legally a financially distressed company. And at the present moment, one of the, I assume because the issues have not still become very apparent, but I think everybody is going down the road of a cash flow insolvency where there is no ready money to satisfy the debts as they become due. Okay. Now, that being a distressed company, the director, whether you are in a distressed company or whether you are in a company that is flourishing, the common law duties that had been developed over centuries in England have been given a statutory flavor in the Companies Act of 2007, where the director's duties are now not only a common law duty, a duty under the common law, but it is also a duty under the statute. Now, the concept of a director's duty arises out of the historical development of what is called fiduciary duties. Fiduciary duties is if you're looking after, because the directors are basically looking after the company by running it profitably for the benefit of the shareholders. Now, that running of the company or the management of the company by the directors gives them an obligation which is called fiduciary, of which the most common common example might be of what we know as trustees and their beneficiaries, because the trustee will hold the trust property for the benefit of the beneficiary. But there are several differences between a normal, generic trustee beneficiary relationship and a director's duty, fiduciary duty to the company or the stakeholders, the way it has developed. So although it is inherently fiduciary, the duty is inherently fiduciary, that is your directors are people who are carrying out or are managing and acting with assets for the benefit of the company, the shareholders and the others. It is different to the classic trustee beneficiary, the trust relationship that we know under the old Roman law and the Roman Dutch law and the English law. Okay, but the primary duties of a fiduciary is applicable to a company director also. So one of the most basic duties and obligations for a director as a fiduciary is that for at all times the directors must act bona fide and in what the directors consider in the interest of the company, and it should not be for collateral purposes. So when you act for the company or you do something in respect of the company, you must always act bona fide for the benefit of the company and its stakeholders, and not for other purposes. Basically, collateral purposes means for their own personal benefit. Okay, right. So those common law fiduciary duties that came down the centuries with English judicial authorities and texts and even some Sri Lankan cases was given a statutory approval and a statutory flavor by the 2007 Companies Act, where three fundamental duties are given to a shareholder director in terms of sections 187, 188 and 189. Now, because I'm running out of time, we will skip the contents of it, but basically what is important is good faith, not to contravene the provisions of the Companies Act or the articles of the company, and not to act recklessly or negligently, and use the skill and care that you have as a director of the company. Now, those fiduciaries, as in the context of our discussion today, those fiduciary duties become very, very important when the company is in distress, right? Because the law has now developed to the extent that the director's duty is not anymore exclusively towards the company, but is also now towards shareholders, creditors, and other stakeholders. One of the most important developments in that regard is that the duty of the directors with regard to creditors. And that becomes very, very important when the company is in a situation of doubtful solvency, because not only should the directors look after their own interests, that they don't fall into trouble, or that their shareholders are going to lose money because of the insolvency. Most importantly, they must look at the creditors' interest also. And if it is in the creditors' interest that you wind up and settle the creditors as early as possible, then irrespective of whether that has an effect on yourself as your directors and your perks and your cars and your fancy life, or your shareholders, you need to act. Now, those duties on insolvency, on how directors must act, is set out in section 219. Now, this is, I personally believe, has been misunderstood. These provisions have been misunderstood to say that if the company comes into what we call a section 219 position, that you have no other option than to wind up the company. Okay, but the actual, if you actually read section 219, and we are actually constrained by the fact that we don't have much judicial authority and there's very little judicial discussion on these points. Section 219 doesn't specifically say that you have to go for a winding up. Section 219 says this: any director who believes that the company is unable to pay its debts, so the belief has to be there that the company is unable to pay its debt, must immediately call a meeting of the board of directors. And at that point, the board of directors have two options. Actually, three options. One is to consider whether they should go to court and seek a winding up of the company. That is a court winding up. Or you appoint a liquidator, again for a voluntary winding up. Or, this is the most important part, you can appoint an administrator to take over the company and see whether there's a solution for the company to get over the immediate problem. So it might be a temporary cash flow problem. It might be a temporary balance sheet problem. It might be that you have a property earmarked for sale and the sale is not coming through. So in such a, say it's a short-term problem or it's a specific issue, then you can appoint an administrator to take over and try and do it, try and get the company out of it. Or they can also agree to continue the business of the company. Now the problem is, if you decide to continue the business of the company, bona fide you might decide it, but subsequently if the company has to go for winding up, then there will be issues that arise with regard to your culpability in the insolvency of the company. Okay, so either you can enter where the company is insolvent, and the first stage is how you decide whether you are insolvent or not is to maybe call your auditors and ask them for a report to see whether you have passed the solvency test or not. If you have failed the solvency test, you might be able to sort it out. Or if not, if the situation is dire, you can decide to go to court and wind up the company. or you can appoint the liquidator and wind up the company on a voluntary basis, or appoint an administrator and see whether you can get over the problem, or you can carry on for the business. And there are provisions in the Companies Act, which I will come to, where to further the carrying on of the business and to get over temporary problems, there is provisions in the Companies Act to do that while the company is carrying on its business. Okay, right. Now the repercussion of not doing this in terms of section 219, because you see section 219, so you have all those options that are available. Where you fail to comply with the requirement and it is insolvent, then you will, the repercussion or the penalty is that if the company goes into winding up subsequently, any loss suffered by the creditors of the company have to be personally paid by the directors, not the shareholders, but by the directors. If you decide to continue the company and you go into liquidation subsequently, and because of that decision there is liabilities or loss or damage being caused to the company, then to the creditors, then the director will be liable for those personally. Okay, right. The next option is, I will just skip to, this is what is unable to pay its debt because of the time limit. The next section that is important, section 220, where there is a serious loss of capital, where the net assets of the company are less than half of the stated capital. The directors must immediately call for an extraordinary general meeting and give a solution to the shareholders, and if necessary ask the shareholders to wind up or take necessary action to remedy the situation. Now here, if you don't do this, it is considered offense under the Companies Act, and then it's a penal offense to the extent that you will be fined an amount up to 250,000 rupees. So the repercussions of not doing, not acting in terms of section 219 are monetary, where you have to, as a director, you will have to pay from your own pocket any damage suffered by the creditors. The repercussion of 220, where there is a serious loss of capital, is that you are exposing yourself to a fine. Okay, right. The other remedies, like I said, you can continue with the affairs of the company in terms of 219. The other remedies that are available are what is called a compromise in terms of section part 8, court-approved arrangement or compromise in terms of part 9, or administration. Okay. Now, compromise necessarily means, because of the time limit, I will restrict the discussion to a certain extent. A compromise means you enter into a negotiated understanding with your creditors on how to get over the problem. So you might renegotiate loans. You might, the banks might restructure your debt capital. You might, and then they might give you further time, not only the banks, all creditors. You might have to come to a compromise, what lawyers generally talk about, what we call a settlement. And that settlement can be done officially with court approval. And if you act in terms of the agreed terms of settlement in terms of part 8 and 9 of the Companies Act, at the end of it, if you act strictly according to the terms of that compromise that you have proposed, then you don't have to go down the path of winding up. Arrangement is where there is a arrangement between the shareholders with regard to the share capital. Administration is you appoint a third party, most of the time, maybe an expert, to take over the company and run the company, where the board of directors step back, administrator takes over the company and runs the company, and he has to give a solution within a period. The period is how you calculate the period is specified in section 400 of the Companies Act. So the administrator will then take over the management of the company, find a solution, and if he can't find a solution, he will recommend winding up, and the administrator will make an application to court saying that, look, I tried my best, I can't do it, it's impossible to get over this problem, so I recommend that the company should go in for winding up. So all these things can be done even where the company is technically insolvent and is in a section 219 situation. So you have to be very careful if then your clients will come in a completely desperate situation with the only idea that they will have to close the company. You have to see whether without going down that path and killing the company, maybe that company might get over their financial difficulties, maybe they might get some good orders subsequently. Nothing is written in stone that everything will be a disaster. They might repurpose and go into another new form of business. So you can use these remedies acting in terms of section 219, the third or fourth options that have been given. Now, these things, there are certain things that you need to look at and think of when you're doing that, especially if you are opposed to if your client is opposed and where the company has decided to go for a compromise. The situation is, when you do a compromise, you identify the class of creditors. So maybe let's say you identify unsecured creditors. Let's say you have 100 unsecured creditors. That is the class with which you are coming into a settlement. So you might discuss with them and say, okay, I will pay 75% of it. Of that, I can't pay the entire 100, or I say we'll pay the capital back, but we can't manage the interest, or we can't even manage 100% of the capital. Allow us to make only 75%. Give us a period, let's say a period of 1 year. As a show of bona fides, even with difficulty, we will pay the first 25 within the first month, and then restructure the balance within 11 months. And the creditors will discuss that. Now, the important thing is the court specifies the percentage of the majority that is required to pass a compromise. So if the normal majority that is given is 2/3, that is 66%. So if the court specifies that 66% of the class of creditors that you are presenting your compromise proposal decides to go with that proposal, the minority dissenting creditors, whether they like it or not, will be bound by that decision, because that decision of the majority will be given approval by the court. So the first thing that you have to understand is, if your client is a creditor in a particular class where a compromise is proposed, even if you are in the minority, you might be bound by that arrangement or compromise. Okay, then necessarily, if you are a creditor, it might be more prudent to enter into a compromise and recover whatever that is possible from a company which is staring down the barrel, and it most probably would be wound up unless they go through this compromise solution. for as creditors, it may be worthwhile to agree to a restructuring of the debt or a moratorium of the debt so that you don't lose anything. Okay, right. So merely because the company is financially distressed, it does not mean that you have to wind up the company. There are other provisions available under the Companies Act. And as far as the directors are concerned, as long as the directors act bona fide, they don't violate the company provisions of the Companies Act or the articles of association. They don't uh, they don't act negligently. As long as you do that, the directors will have a way out. There is a lot more that with regard to the repercussions of directors not acting in strict terms of section 219, that is section 376, 77, 78, where again the directors might, there are offenses, so you might face jail term, there are fines, quite steep fines, and in certain situations for what is called fraudulent trading, that is where the company is insolvent, you still go ahead and take more credit. In situations of fraudulent trading, again the directors will and the officers of the company will be held personally liable for those provisions. Those what we call malpractices. Okay, I have, I think, another 10 slides or so. I think I overestimated my capacity to go on. But I will ask the Law Society, if possible, to post this, the presentation, and I have done 2 articles on this, if possible, to post it in their social media pages with access to you all, so that if you want, and those the 2 one was published in the Daily News, I think, during the curfew time. So I will get them to the Law Society, and hopefully if you can go to their website within the next week or so, you might be able to download the presentation and also the uh, the uh, the 2 articles that I have done. Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry if I went over time. I think I have, but I think we can extend it for a short period of time, Chatura, to get the questions in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Very informative and interesting presentation. And as you, in your concluding remarks, you said that the slides will be, you can make the slides available to the CLS to be distributed among the participants. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, I will send it to you all. Then you can post it on your Facebook. You have a Facebook and whatever.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll send it to Imas, and Imas knows the magic, no?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Now there are several questions which I will post one by one.
Yeah.
There are several questions, and within the time limit available, we'll attend to.
Shall we keep to the original 15 minutes for the questions and see?
Yeah, that's fine. Now it is, yes, we will fix. Now it is 6 o'clock. We'll go till 6:15.
Yeah.
The first question is, can we waive off the solvency test requirement at the time of distribution, as the shareholders under section 2 able to unanimously waive off section 56 related to distribution? Can I repeat it? Or you...
that
waiving
is a,
off of the solvency test.
No. That is a pretty complex question and a double-edged question. Whichever way I answer, there will be counter arguments. Now, I think what is being proposed is, just give me a second. What is the requirement? This is not strictly relevant to the discussion today, but before you do a distribution, you need to get a solvency test done. So the section 56 related, can I just, because unfortunately I don't have my Companies Act also here, because I was only focusing on this. This is Chatura, I think, is a bit too complex to answer now, and I must say, without looking at the Companies Act, it will be a bit difficult to answer. But I know the answer, but I don't want to go down that road and maybe give a wrong impression. So can we just leave that for the moment? I will try and get the Companies Act.
Yes, and also, sir, you are
Yeah.
a readily available counsel to answer any question, even at the courts or outside the court premises.
Yeah.
So
No, it's just that I
Yes.
might need some time to. I know this problem because it has come up earlier. But I would prefer to have a look at it and give an answer. I'm sorry.
Yes, we'll leave that question, and anyway,
Yeah.
the participant who has posted that question can contact the speaker, because he's the person who's readily available at any instance, even to help the juniors, and anyone therefore can be contacted and get the clarification. So, shall we move to the second question, sir? Now, the second question is, what happens in the case of a tech startup which has always been insolvent, and banks have lent to the company at a time when the company was insolvent, even when the loan or overdrafts was granted?
Yeah.
Is there a new duty on the directors in the current COVID-19 world as more financially stress building on the company?
No, the problem is you have already crossed the Rubicon as far as I am concerned. The minute you have gone and got a loan, knowing that the company is insolvent, because that is the part I left out of the discussion, because section 376 onwards, especially if you take a loan with the idea of with knowledge that you are, can I just share the screen on that? I will just go to that point. If you can just give me some couple of seconds. Just give me a couple of seconds. Okay, section 375 says, what it says is, where any business of a company that has been wound up has been carried on with intent to defraud creditors of the company. That I don't think is not the issue, or the creditors of any person, or for any fraudulent purpose. Every person who has knowingly being a party to that commits an offense, right? So whether you like it or not, because those are the duties that are given to you in terms of the Companies Act, then okay, then 376 says, in the course of it is found out that the person has taken part in formation or promotion of the company, or any director, manager, or liquidator has misapplied or retained or become liable or accountable for money or property of the company, being guilty of negligence, default, or breach of duty or trust in relation to the company, then you become personally liable. Okay. Now the issue is, technically, the just give me a second. Technically, when you took the money, you had a duty in terms of the section 186, 87, 88 to see that the company is not insolvent, because you have to be very careful when you're a director or director of a company to see that your company is solvent all the time. Because the minute it goes, so at least now bigger companies, I think every time they have to make a decision, they get the insolvency test, the solvency test done. So if you have taken the money at the time you were insolvent, there's not going to be a new fresh duty just because COVID-19 came. You're already down the path of acting in contravention of the Companies Act. Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir. Shall we move to the next question? It is with regard to the administrator option.
Yes.
The participant has also requested for a little bit more elaboration on the administrator
Right.
option.
Okay.
While
Again,
posting a question,
right.
sir,
Yeah.
regarding the administrator, the question is, do the administrator steps into the shoes of the board?
He does.
Uh,
Can I just go back again to share the screen with regard to those slides? I had dealt with this. Just give me 1 second. Okay, just give me a second. Okay, sorry. So if you look at section 400 onwards, an administrator shall manage the affairs, business and property of the company. They may do all such things as may be necessary or desirable for the management of the affairs of the company, business and property of the company, have all the powers that could be exercised by a receiver of a whole of the property and undertaking in terms of 443, 445 and 446, right? Then it is further provided where the exercise of any power on the company which is conferred on the company or its board of directors by the act or the articles of association will interfere with the exercise of the administrator's powers. Those powers shall not be exercised by the company or the board of directors, right? If they do want to do certain things, they have to act with the approval of the administrator. So it's not a simple case of stepping into the shoes of the directors. The directors also function, but the appointment of the administrator, what he has to actually do can be specified. So to that extent, the board of directors will not have powers. You can actually completely hand over the entire company to the administrator and tell him to give a solution. So depending on the situation, it changes, but it doesn't make the directors completely powerless. But it depends on how you arrange the appointment procedure and the powers of the company. Now, in terms of section 418, an administrator on his appointment shall, it's mandatory, take into his custody or control all the property to which the company appears to be entitled. The administrator shall manage the affairs, business and property of the company. So in effect, he is stepping into the shoes of the directors, but it depends on what exactly the administrator is asked to do. Okay, so if it is a overall complete handover of to an administrator, then it will be basically stepping into the shoes of the administrator. Then they had also asked,
can they be appointed by
the creditor? Appointing procedure is no. Administrators, hold on. Appointment of administrators is done by the board of the company. Maybe on the application of the board of the company are the people who decides whether the company should go in for administration or not, right?
The creditors appoint the ability for the creditors to appoint is no.
No, right? The company has to appoint the administrator. Whether the administrator administrators become liable? No, administrators' powers and liabilities are stipulated in the Companies Act. The specific powers are that what he can do, what he can't do, and how much he is responsible.
Yeah,
That is
means
stipulated in the Companies Act.
there's no fiduciary duty vested on the.
There is not necessarily. There are specific duties that are given, and there is no, in the sense that the same fiduciary duties that the directors have is not replicated here because he is coming for a special purpose.
We'll move to the next question. He says, in the case of lending financial companies regulated by the central bank, being directed to defer payments, including interest and capital by 6 months, the funds lent being depositors' funds, the results in the company heading to a distress or insolvent position as a result, can the directors be held liable for not acting in the interest of its depositors?
So I suppose we are talking about maybe the financial institution going into trouble because of this,
yes,
no?
That's right. Lending financial institutions.
Yes, but if I'm not mistaken, this governments or the central banks, this debt moratorium and debt relief that is being granted, the central bank is going to step in with some money, right? It's not going to it's not going to be a complete. It's like, if I'm not mistaken, the central bank is giving money to the financial institutions to go through this. But what it says is the depositors fund. That's an arguable thing whether, but the issue is, if you're doing it bona fide, right? If you're doing it with advice obtained, every position, if you look at 86, 87 of the duties that is stipulated by the Companies Act on the directors, it always says what you think is right. What is prohibited by the Companies Act is that you should never do anything that is wrong and wrong to your knowledge. You can't break the law. That is, you can't break the provisions of the Companies Act. You can't break the provisions of the Articles of Association. You have to act with skill and without negligence. Then you act with the duty towards everybody, but bona fide. So if you act bona fide and you have no option, because with this central bank circular, the financial institutions have no option. They have to adhere to those regulations. So in those circumstances, I don't think the directors can be held liable for the company going into distress.
Thank you. The next question, I think we can deal with 2 more questions before wrapping up. The penultimate question, which I would like to pose to you, sir, is by one of our participants. Can it be considered fraudulent trading, that is within code, if the bank gave lines of credit while knowing the financial position of the company and that it was insolvent? Knowing that the company was insolvent, if the bank has given a line of credit, can it be considered as fraudulent trading?
Yeah. So if you look at fraudulent trading, the definition of fraudulent trading, just give me a second. If you look at the specific sections with regard to it, section 375 says this, right? Where any business or company has been, right, of the company or any other person of a fraudulent purpose, every person who has knowingly being a party to the carrying on of the business in that manner shall be deemed to have committed an offense. Now, the situation here is, if the banks, question is, if the banks knew that you were insolvent, can it be fraudulent trading? Well, the problem is, I don't think any, how will a bank, I don't know, it must be a very imprudent bank who will look at a company, and when the company is insolvent, then uh, give more credit to a company which is already insolvent. That seems to be a difficult situation. I don't think a bank, if they had knowledge that the company was insolvent in the first place, would be giving credit to a company. But even if it did give credit to a company, well, whether it is a tech startup or not is irrelevant. It's just whether it's a company, or whether it's a company in the first instance, and a and uh, the customer of a bank. Uh, it's a funny question. I don't know if a bank. So it's like, I think you will have a problem. The bank will have a problem if they knew that it was solvent and they continue to do it. But fraudulent trading doesn't give any. The law doesn't worry about the creditors. What the law says is, if you knew something was wrong and you continue to trade, you are liable. Whether the other side knew or not is not stipulated in that. If you knew that it was bad, if you knew you were insolvent and you carried on, you are liable. There are certain defenses available. One is again bona fide. If you did it bona fide, you're safe. But if you knew you were insolvent and did it, irrespective of whether the creditor knew it or not, it will be in terms of the section fraudulent trading. But it's very unlikely that a creditor knowing that the company is insolvent will still keep on putting more money unless it's a rescheduling or something. Anyway, I don't think it has any whether the bank knew it or not has any relevance. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Now
Yeah.
we'll move into the final question. We'll take this question as the final question and conclude the
Yeah.
lecture. The question is that there's a 4% loan relief facility that has been offered by the central bank. There's a question why the banks have not yet given this facility, this benefit to the applicants. And it says further that the banks have said that the central bank has not approved the applicants' particular applications. And whether this delay means, are they pushing the companies to insolvency?
The government might. I'm actually I have no idea why the central bank is not paying the 4%. They must be having their reasons, or they will say they have already dispersed the amount. I don't know why, or whether it has been given or not. I think I know the banks are not getting the entire amount that they are going to be exposed to, and also this 4% relief has not also been gone. I know that it has not happened, but I don't know why it has not happened. But these are matters that you can't pinpoint it to the directors and say that directors are liable in the event. So, for example, it might forget all these banks. You might have gone and invested in the finance or something, and it crashes. It pushes you to insolvency. If your conduct as a director was done bona fide and using skill, like say for example, you use your skill and without negligently deposited money in the finance when it was the financials are perfectly okay, then you can't be found fault after that if the finance company crashes. The fundamental requirement is, now here also the situation is, it's not your problem, or it's not the cause of insolvency is not you, it is because of some other reasons. In those circumstances, I don't think the directors can be held liable, but definitely, is it pushing your company into insolvency? Well, this is a relief. So you might have been insolvent already. Not giving the relief might not be pushing you into insolvency, but definitely the directors or the company can't be held liable or responsible for this, for the banks, central banks inaction.
Thank you, sir. I think the time allocation for the Q&A session also has now lapsed. So
Yeah.
we'll bring this session to an end. And in concluding, may I thank Mr. Chandaka Jayasundara, President's Council, who has accepted our invitation and not only accepted our invitation, encouraged us to start this webinar seminar series or the lecture series, and also has given a great input, advice and contribution towards the success of the CLS from the time that we know. And thank you very much, sir, for your commitment, advice and time spent on this lecture.
Chatura,
Also,
just one second,
yeah.
Chatura. There is a question from Teja.
Yeah.
That one of the slides, I think I will do them. And I also found out while presenting that it doesn't read properly about the solvency test. I will make that correction when I'm sending you the. It's a slide with regard to the solvency test.
Corrected slides will be posted in the CLS website. And also, this initiation was taken by Mr. Vijay Gamage, President of the Colombo Law Society, who has been instrumental in doing a lot of things during the distress period, and especially sanitization of the court premises was conducted solely by the Colombo Law Society with the support of Colombo Law Library, and Ms. Jayasundara has been instrumental in finding funds for that as well. And also thank that also the society take this opportunity to thank you, sir, for that. And Mr. Vijay Gamage is the person who initiated and instrumental this webinar series. And myself joining with my co-chair of the seminars committee, Mr. Sarath Karunaratne. We are planning to go ahead with this seminar. So I invite the participants to put your suggestions, comments, because since this is the first webinar conducted by the CLS, there might be loopholes, there might be things to improve. So we very much appreciate your valuable comments. And also, this would not be possible unless the technical support and the commitment given by our young member, Mr. Imitias, who has been doing all the technical work, coordinating us. He has been doing a tremendous work, and I must really appreciate his contribution, because it is very rare to find juniors of that caliber who commit time for the work in societies of this nature. And also, I would invite all the participants, and also please pass over the message that we will be conducting these seminars every Friday from 5 to 6 o'clock. So keep the day free, keep the time slot free to join with us seminar. Therefore, next seminar, the topic and the speaker will be immediately by another 2 days. We will be posting in our website, and I again invite you all to post your comments, which will be very much important. So this brings the conclusion of our seminar, the webinar, and we hope to see you soon next Friday with a new topic, which will be published soon. Thank you very much.